Okay, this is Berhane Selassie again. I think this is my fifth installment on Christ Omniscience. And one of my opponents a couple of years back was a man named CIA Loves You. He was supposed to be a Catholic, educated in an Australian university. But anyway, he essentially held to Balthazar's kenosis view that Christ, for a while, became ignorant, surrendered his divine attributes, and so on. Anyway, one of CIA's rebuttals was that Christ was not omniscient because Mark says he could not do miracles. Though he did not present the text, I assume CIA was referring to Mark 6:5, which says he was not able to perform any mighty deed, which I admit looks pretty bad if you only read that part of the verse and do not try to understand it or take into account other passages or the context, or ignore the church fathers' interpretations. However, what the whole verse says is, so he was not able to perform any mighty deed there, apart from curing a few sick people by laying hands on them. So the fact that he cured people shows that he did perform some mighty deeds, and that he had the ability. The reason Christ did not do miracles was not because he did not want to do it there, because he did not want to do it there. And the scripture says that he did some miracles there. He cured the sick. The next verse explains further why. He was amazed at their lack of faith. So generally, faith is associated with salvation and with healing and the miracles. Here's what St. Thomas Aquinas says in regards to CIA's argument found in Summa Theologica. He says, first of all, reply to objection 1. You could see the article here by clicking into the New Advent. Actually, this is a different site, but anyway, you can check it out for yourself on either New Advent or this catechism site. It says, reply to objection 1. When it is said that, quote, he could not do any miracles there, quote, it is not to be understood that he could not do them absolutely, but that it was not fitting for him to do them. For it was unfitting for him to work miracles among unbelievers. Wherefore it is said farther on, and he wondered because of their unbelief. In like manner it is said in Genesis 18:17, can I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? And in Genesis 19:22, I cannot do anything till thou go in thither. Anyway, now here's Cornelius Van Lapide's commentary on Mark 6:5. He says, and he could not do any miracles there, could not, i.e., that is, would not, because he did not think it proper to give what was holy to dogs, that is, to force his miracles upon unbelieving and ungrateful citizens. So, could not is used for would not. Genesis 37 verse 4 and John 7 verse 7, because, as St. Victor of Antioch on this passage, two things must coincide for the attaining of health, namely the faith of those who need healing and the power of him who will heal. Therefore, if either of these be wanting, the blessing of a cure will not readily be attained. Now, likewise, St. John Cassian, who was a student of St. John Chrysostom in the 4th century, the Patriarch of Constantinople, St. John Cassian, who actually traveled to the West, says in his Conference 13, verse in chapter 15, the following: but among others, the unfathomable depth of Christ's beneficence was so stopped up that it was said, and Jesus could not do there no mighty works because of their unbelief, Mark 6:6. And so the bounty of God is actually shaped according to the capacity of man's faith. So that to one it is said, according to your faith be it unto you, Matthew 9:29, and to another, go your way, and as you have believed, so it be unto you, Matthew 8:13. To another it be said, it be unto you according to your will. As you will, Matthew 15:28, and to another, your faith has made you whole, Luke 18:42. Now Titian's Diatessaron which was written in about the year 180, and then he apostatized to some Gnostic sect, but it was 2nd century, where he tried to harmonize these passages. He writes the following, Tatianus, he says, "And he was not able to do there many mighty works, because of their unbelief." So even then it was understood as being qualified by their belief. In fact, Matthew's gospel explicitly reads, because in Matthew 13 verse 58, "And he did not work many mighty deeds there because of their lack of faith." In response to those who say that Jesus Christ, as God, while being a child in the flesh, was ignorant of things and had to learn and grow, citing Luke 2:52. This is what Saint Cyril of Alexandria's commentary on Luke Homily 5 says on this matter. "Do not think to yourself, how can God grow? How can he who gives grace to angels and to men receive fresh wisdom? Rather reflect upon the great skill with which we are initiated into his mystery. For the wise evangelist did not introduce the word in his abstract and incorporeal nature. He says of him that, quote, he increased in stature and wisdom, in grace, unquote," referring to Luke 2:52, "but after having shown that he was born in the flesh of a woman and took our likeness, he then assigns to him these human attributes. Only then does he call a child and say that he grew in stature. As his body grew little by little in obedience to corporal laws, so he is said to have increased in wisdom, not receiving fresh supplies of wisdom. God is perceived by the understanding to be entirely perfect in all things and altogether incapable of being destitute in any attribute suitable for the Godhead. So God, the Word, gradually manifested his wisdom proportionally to the age which the body had attained. The body then advances in stature and the soul in wisdom. The divine nature is incapable of increase in either one or the other. Seeing that the Word of God is all perfect, with good reason he connected the increase of wisdom with the growth of the bodily stature, because the divine nature reveals its own wisdom in proportion to the measure of bodily growth." Again, that's St. Cyril of Alexandria, his homily 5 concerning Luke 2. Now, St. Jerome says likewise, writing about the year 400 in his homily on Psalm 15 or 16, depending on whether you use the Septuagint or the Hebrew numbering. He says this: "How does he who is wisdom receive understanding? Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and grace before men and God. This means not so much as that the Son was instructed by the Father, but that his human nature was instructed by his own divinity. There is the seed of prophecy of him who blossomed from the root of Jesse. The Spirit of the Lord rested upon him, a spirit of wisdom and of understanding." You can also check out St. Damascene's Orthodox Faith 322. Now this is what the Catechism of the Catholic Church says. This is our modern catechism. It's used on churches throughout the world. It says, "The soul of Christ in his human knowledge. Apolarians of Laodicea asserted that in Christ the divine word had replaced the soul or spirit. Against this error, the Church confessed that the eternal Son also assumed a rational human soul. This human soul that the Son of God assumed is endowed with a true human knowledge. As such, this knowledge could not itself be unlimited. It was exercised in the historical conditions of his existence in time and space. This is why the Son of God could, when he became man, increase in wisdom and in stature and in favor with man and God, and would even have to inquire from himself about what one in the human condition could learn only from experience. This corresponded to the reality of his voluntary emptying of himself, taking the form of a slave." That's quoting Philippians 2:7 also. But at the same time, this truly human knowledge of God's Son expressed the divine life in his person. The human nature of God's Son, not by itself, but by union with the Word, knew and showed forth in itself everything that pertains to God. Such is first of all the case with the intimate and immediate knowledge that the Son of God, made man, has of his Father. The Son in his human knowledge also showed the divine penetration he had in the secret things of the human hearts. By its, referring to the human nature, union with the divine wisdom in the person of the Word incarnate, Christ enjoyed in his human knowledge the fullness of understanding of the eternal plans he had to reveal. What he admitted to not knowing in this area, elsewhere he declares himself not sent to reveal. Again, he's referring there to Mark 13:32, Matthew 24:36, and lastly, in the last one, referring to Acts 1 verse 7. Simply put, and this, by the way, that was referenced in Catechism 473, that paragraph. Simply put, Christ knew everything, but he was not sent to reveal everything. For this reason, the divine nature did not reveal the hour to humans. And as I already discussed this kenosis view in the last video, I'll skip over it. CA's response to all this that I've shown before is, well, I don't deny Christ was God, yet CIA's view is still condemned in this because the Pope, as mentioned here, states that Christ was complete in his own nature, and ours also. CIA's view is that Christ temporarily gave up and deposited his divine attributes. Christ is the Word incarnate, not part of the Word. He's not part God, not part Word. He's fully God. CIA will argue he is not making Jesus any less divine, but CIA is, since God is omniscient and Jesus is God, he must be omniscient according to his divinity. A, Jesus is God. B, God is omniscient. C, ergo, Jesus is omniscient. To say Jesus is not omniscient would mean that Jesus is only semi-divine, as if he were a god of the pagans, similar to the demigod, perhaps. Say simply tries to twist the fathers as to make Jesus' limited knowledge seem plausible. For example, he explains that the Council of Rome is too vague and makes no reference to the Incarnation, so therefore his belief is not condemned at all by it. Unfortunately, he's just trying to jump in through hoops. The Council simply says that the Son of God is omniscient, the time does not matter. So he acknowledges that Christ, being omniscient, is the classical view, but he claims the canonic view is not heretical and may be right, as if the Church was wrong for 1900 years waiting for theologians like von Balthasar to put it in the right path. CIA claims not to be a modernist, and that lamentably Sani does not condemn those who say Christ was not omniscient. On this point, many scholars, apologists, priests, and theologians have said, and it does make CA a modernist to claim Christ was not omniscient after the Incarnation, and that it was condemned by Pope Pius X, and is not simply modernistic, but possibly even apostasy. And also I mentioned Pope Pius XII condemned it in 1951, referring specifically to the canonic doctrine. Anyway, CA clearly claims to know something that was not even known by the apostles themselves, which in fact is condemned by the words of the apostles in the gospel, particularly in John 21, I think it's verse 14, where Peter says, "You know all things," but apparently CIA knows better. To say Christ and his divinity on earth was not all-knowing is to make Christ less than that of the Father. Christ, in saying he did not know the day or the hour, was saying in his human nature he was ignorant, since God does not allow such knowledge to men. Acts 1:7 makes it clear Christ only knew in his divinity was aware of that hour. Some try to defend CIA, trying to state that Christ in his human nature was not capable of comprehending omniscience. I, however, also showed 1 Corinthians 13 shows that otherwise we will see face-to-face and partial understanding will end. Furthermore, Catechism 474 also says otherwise concerning Christ. Furthermore, Vatican I states the following: if anyone says that a human being cannot be divinely elated to a knowledge and perfection which exceeds the natural, but of himself can and must reach finally the possession of all truth and goodness by continual development, let him be anathema. CA's utilization of the Apostles' Mark's Gospel 13:32 is erroneous, since the chapter in context is Christ referring to himself as the Son of Man, not the Son of God. The same is true in the corresponding verse in Matthew 24, verse 36. Now, here is a quote, pretty long quote, about John Paul II, another audience he had in 1988 called Jesus Christ Emptied Himself. Here's what he says. Behold the man. This expression contains in a certain sense the whole truth about Christ, the true man, about him who is like us in all things but sin, about him who has united himself in some fashion with every man. They call him the friend of tax collectors and sinners. Precisely as a victim for sin, Jesus entered into solidarity with all humanity, including sinners, even to the death on the cross. Precisely in this condition of a victim is to which Jesus was reduced. As a final aspect of his humanity stands out, this aspect must be accepted and profoundly meditated on in the light of the mystery of his self-emptying kenosis. According to St. Paul, though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness, and found human in appearance. And he humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Philippians 2:6-8. This text from the letter of the Philippians introduces us to the mystery of Christ's kenosis. To express this mystery, the apostle uses the first of all the words emptied himself, which refers especially to the reality of the incarnation. The Word made flesh, John 1:14. God the Son assumed the human nature, humanity, and becoming true man while remaining God. The truth about Christ as man must always be considered in relationship to God the Son. This permanent reference in itself is indicated in St. Paul's text, he emptied himself. It does not in any way mean he ceased to be God. That would be absurd. It means rather, as the apostle perceptively expressed it, that he did not deem equality with God something to be grasped, but that though he was in form of God, in forma Dei, as the true Son of God, he assumed a human nature deprived of glory, subject to suffering and death, in which he could live in obedience to the Father, even to the ultimate sacrifice. In this self-emptying, which profoundly characterizes the truth about Christ, true man, we can say that it reestablishes it and restores it. When he read that the Son did not regard equality with God something to be grasped, we cannot see in these words but an allusion to the first and original temptation to which Adam and Eve yielded at the beginning. You will become, that is, you will be like God, knowing good and evil, Genesis 3:5. They yielded to the temptations to be like God, even though they were only creatures. He who is God, the Son, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. In becoming man, he emptied himself, and by that choice, he restored all human beings, however poor and deprived, to their original dignity. To express the mystery of Christ's kenosis, St. Paul uses another phrase, he humbled himself. He used this expression in the context of the reality of the redemption. He wrote that Jesus Christ humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross, Philippians 2:8. Here Christ's kenosis is described in its definitive dimension. From the human point of view, in its dimension of the self-emptying by means of the passion and cruel death, from the divine point of view, it is the redemption effected by the merciful love of the Father through the Son, who freely obeyed out of the love of the Father and to save humanity. In that moment there was a new beginning of God's glory in human history, the glory of Christ, his Son made man. The Pauline text says, because of this God greatly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name. Commenting on this text of the letter of the Philippians, St. Athanasius says, the expression he exalted does not imply that the nature of the Word was exalted. The latter seems to have always been equal to God. It indicates, however, the exaltation of the human nature. These words, therefore, were uttered only after the incarnation of the Word, so that it would be clear that the terms such as humble and exalted, refers solely to the human dimension. In fact, only that which is humble can be exalted. Athanasius Adversus Arianus, Oratio Primu 41. Here we add merely that the whole human nature, all humanity humiliated in the painful condition to which it had been reduced by sin, finds the source of its new glory in the exaltation of Christ the man. Elsewhere we see John Paul II in 1998, September 26, saying Christians are sometimes tempted to miss the point of the kenosis of the cross of Jesus, preferring instead the way of pride, power, and dominion. Again, Pope Benedict XVI, commenting on kenosis, says the following. This was back in September 28th, 2008 papal address on Pope John Paul I. He says, with this parable, Jesus emphasizes the predilection for sinners who convert, and he teaches that humility is essential for welcoming the gift of salvation. St. Paul, too, in the passage of the letter to the Philippians that we meditate on today, calls for humility. Do nothing out of selfishness or vainglory, he writes, but humbly regard others as superior to you. Philippians 2:3. These are Christ's own sentiments. He laid aside divine glory for love of us, became man, and lowered himself even to dying on the cross. Philippians 2:5-8. The Greek word that is used here is ekinosen, literally means that he emptied himself and places the profound humility and infinite love of Jesus, the humble servant par excellence, in a clear light. Pope Benedict XVI, again saying in another papal audience on St. Paul's Christology in October 22nd, 2008, says, the hymn found in this letter in Philippians 2:6-11 contrasts Paul's preexistence in the form of God and his subsequent kenosis or self-emptying, even to the point of death on a cross. And again, he says in World Youth Day in 2007, March 29th, he says, God's love for us, which began with creation, became visible in the mystery of the cross, in that kenosis of God, in that self-emptying, the abasement of the Son of God, which we heard proclaimed by the apostle in the first reading, in the magnificent hymn of Christ to Christ in the letter of the Philippians to the Philippians. Now here's what Cardinal Frank Rode said in 2008. The service of the society, referring to the Jesuits, is a service under the banner of the cross. Formula 1. Every service done out of love necessarily implies a self-emptying kenosis, but not letting go of what one wants to do in order to do what the beloved wants, is to transform the kenosis into the image of Christ, who learned obedience through suffering, referring to Hebrews 5:8. Now, Father Cantalamessa, the preacher of the Pontifical Household, states on the interpretation of Philippians 2:6-7 the following, the third Advent meditation done December 19th, 2008, says the following. We have two different ways or routes into the discovery of who Christ is. On one, that of Paul, being from humanity to reach divinity, from the flesh to reach the spirit, from the history of Christ to arrive at the preexistence of Christ. The other, that of John, follows in the inverse path. It begins from the word's divinity to arrive at affirming his humanity, from his existence in eternity to ascend his existence in time. Paul's approach makes the resurrection the hinge of the two phases, and John sees the passage as turning on the incarnation. These two approaches consolidated in the epoch that followed and gave rise to the two models or archetypes, and follow two Christological schools: the Antiochian school influenced by Paul and the Alexandrian school influenced by John. Neither group was aware of choosing between Paul and John. Each takes itself to include both. This is undoubtedly true, but it is the fact that the two influences are visible and distinguishable, like two rivers that merge together but are nevertheless identifiable by the different color of its waters. This difference is reflected, for example, in the different way in which the two schools interpret Christ's kenosis in Philippians 2. From the 2nd and 3rd century even down to modern exegesis, two different readings can be delineated. According to the Alexandrian school, that the initial subject of the hymn is the Son of God, pre-existent in the form of God. In this case, the kenosis, or pouring out, would consist in the incarnation and becoming man. According to the Antiochian school, the sole subject of the hymn from the beginning to the end is the historical Christ Jesus of Nazareth. In this case, the kenosis would consist in the abasement inherent in becoming a slave, submitting himself to passion and death. The difference between the two schools is not that some follow Paul and some others John, but that the others interpret John in light of Paul and the others Paul in light of John. The difference in the framework or background perspective that is adopted for illustrating the mystery of Christ. It can be said that the main lines of the Church's dogma and theology have formed in the confrontation between these schools, which continue to have an impact today. Now this is going to be, I'm going to make another video. This is Brahim Selassie, Orthodox Catholic 1.